The Big 12. How good is the Big 12? Um, so I'll give you my brief summary. Is I was extremely impressed with Texas. I know it can be excused. Alabama played a bad game. Maybe they did. I couldn't really tell it that they played a bad game, or maybe they're just not as explosive as they typically are. I think there's a little bit of truth to both. But shoot, when Texas loses Quinn Ewers, who definitely, I got to say, for all the hype that kid's received, it seems to be substantiated. He looked great against Alabama for playing his second game. And then Hudson Card comes in. Hudson Card gets his ankle turned, and he's not able to operate as he healthy, which is obviously his calling card is his mobility. He really burned Alabama from a running standpoint. Then he gets hobbled up, and so Sark's limited in terms of what he can do with this offense, and they still outplay Alabama. Should have won the ball game. I think there's a question as to whether Bryce Young should have been called for a safety in the end zone. Anyway, they lose on the last second. Actually, there was a play late in that game that this always drives me nuts. When players blitz, it's usually on a blitz. It's usually not like the regular pass rushers, but it's when somebody's coming from a linebacking or a corner spot and they just got a free run and they don't come under control. They just fly right by the quarterback. They get a hip and they kind of swing around them like it's a rodeo or something. And it's like, why didn't you break down and tackle the quarterback? Anyway, that happened, and the game would have been virtually over. There was only like 15 or 20 seconds left in the game, and they would have had, I think it was Ryan Watts came off the corner for Texas, would have had Bryce Young down at like the 50, but he lets him loose, and he runs it down to like the 18-yard line. Game over. They kick the field goal. But I just was really impressed with Texas. Now, whether they can sustain that, I think it was, I don't want to say too impressive, but they took care of business coming off that Bama game against Texas San Antonio, a capable team. But, Baylor lost to BYU, but there's no shame in that. It was on the road. It was overtime. Texas Tech beat Houston. They go to NC State. They do lose that game. Iowa State beat Iowa. Those are some of the bigger matchups. West Virginia went to Pitt. Again, they lost. They threw a pass down to the goal line that would have won the game or tied the game, sent it to overtime. So besides this Kansas State game against Tulane, I don't see any embarrassing displays or performances by the Big 12 thus far. And they seem to be holding serve, and they're really close to if in the same week Baylor could have pulled off the overtime game at BYU and Texas could have turned it against Bama. Those would have been two enormous wins for the conference. But overall, I think the conference is showing itself to be pretty good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree, Mark. And you, we didn't even talk about, haven't even talked about Kansas that we usually talk about with, if you look at, and I'm not spoiling people that haven't watched your top 25, and I don't know if you have them there or not. I hadn't watched this week, but when you look at, if you didn't know who Kansas was, if you didn't know what kind of team that they have been historically, and you see them go on the road and beat Houston and beat West Virginia, then you probably think, oh yeah, that's a top 25 team. So I think that the craziness of this year is Kansas has a decent opportunity to start 5-0. They host Duke this week, then they host Iowa State, and they host TCU. So, and I think, and poor Kansas, everything that they have going on, and they have a legitimate shot to be a bowl team this year, and they're probably going to lose their coach at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Kansas fans, but no, I think it kind of speaks to the fact that the Big 12 is much more competitive than it has been in the past. Texas was as impressive as they were in week 1, and I thought, this week, I thought UTSA would cover that game, and it would be a close game down the stretch, just because that's typically what Texas does when they play over the last few years. When they play well, particularly in a non-conference game, they come back and they kind of lay an egg. They have a little bit of a hangover, and they did a little bit for the first half, but they dominated the second half for the most part against UTSA. And so, and you've got Iowa State sitting here undefeated. You've got you mentioned the Baylor, the Baylor loss. I'm not quite sure what to make of BYU. I thought that they were. I know that they're missing a couple of receivers there, but I was surprised at how easily Oregon dispatched of them. But maybe that's more of a testament to how incredibly dominant Georgia is right now than anything else. But yeah, when you look down, all the way down, Texas Tech is back and forth. Obviously, they won that game against Houston in overtime, and then lost against a pretty good NC State team this week. I think West Virginia is the team that's interesting to kind of look at. I had them finishing ninth in the Big 10, or I'm sorry, Big 12 preseason. And so I think they have a really, really important game on Thursday night against West Virginia. Against Virginia Tech. So if they're able to win that game, then maybe that gives them a little bit more confidence heading into the Big 12 season. But you open up your Big 12 season with a loss to conceivably preseason the worst team in the conference at home, then you got an uphill battle to climb. And then we've got not really talked about Oklahoma State because they really, Arizona State was and is a dumpster fire, so don't really know what to make of that win now. But it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But yeah, I think at this point Texas is a little bit better, than I thought they would be. They've proved it to a certain degree now. I'm with you on Alabama. I don't think they're anywhere near as explosive as they have been. They just don't have the same guys at receiver. They've been fortunate enough to continuously reload, but I don't think they've got anyone there that's quite as good from a top end perspective, at least as they've had in the past. So we'll see how that continues to develop through the season. But yeah, I think they've cemented themselves in terms of, I think they can be in the conversation with perhaps the second best conference in the country. I know before it was kind of a foregone conclusion that the Big Ten was right there behind the SEC, but I think you have there's an argument that can be made, I think, at this point, right? Because you've got Ohio State and Michigan that are right there. They're both obviously very clear, in my opinion, right now, top 5 teams. But then there's some unknowns right now. How good is Wisconsin? How good is Minnesota? How good is Wisconsin lost that game earlier against Washington State. We'll see. Obviously against Ohio State on Saturday. How good is Penn State? Again, I don't know what to take of that Auburn win. Impressive to win by that many points in Jordan-Hare, without a doubt. But Auburn's a bit of a dumpster fire in itself. So yeah, we'll see. I think it'll be interesting to see how the conference season continues to go. But I think the Big 12 still has a hill to climb, just from a national perception. That's I think that's changing, but I think the perception is still that it is a offensive league, which is has turned really more so the other direction than it has in the past. But yeah, we'll see how that continues to go in terms of teams. That Texas is much better defensively, Oklahoma's much better defensively, Kansas State's much better defensively. So we'll see what happens.
Big 12, 22-5 on non-conference record, 5-4 against the Power 5, 9-1 against the Group of 5, 8-0 against the FCS.